So when you were in office, what election laws were then now to what are ones now that are changed? Or has anything changed since the time?
When I got my first election in 2002, early voting was just starting. And
so prior to that, early voting, it's just you could only vote on election day?
Early voting did not exist prior to 2002.
In Florida?
It was either election day, or they called it, still back then, they called it absentee ballot. Now it's called vote by mail ballot.
Right, okay.
Now, in the 70s, absentee ballot meant you had to have a legitimate excuse. You have to, cough up a lung, get a note from a doctor,
or like a work or something,
to vote by absentee ballot. In the 80s, the rules are relaxed to the point that anybody who feels that they're not going to be able to make election day can ask for an absentee ballot. I remember in college, knowing that I would be in Tallahassee, I got an absentee ballot in the 88 election, filled it out before I went back to school, and I was able to make sure I voted. So early voting comes in 2002, but in the 2002 election, it's hardly anybody attends it. In 2004, I got involved with the Republican legal team in George W. Bush's reelection, and early voting out of nowhere just explodes. And I remember we had to bring in folks from Texas to fly in to help out because it was an unruly mess in areas like Lemon City. We had Democratic activists. So in 2004, George W. Bush, because of Jeb, built up a great deal of cordiality and a good relationship with Haitian Americans here in Miami-Dade County. Okay. So we had a lot of Haitian Americans who were going in 2004 to vote for George W. Bush's reelection.
Right.
And we saw Democratic Party activists sending people to start threatening and intimidating folks at early voting.
Isn't that like voter suppression? Couldn't those people be...
they were doing the sign of the Haitian necklace, which is the tire with the gasoline flaming around their necks. They were trying to intimidate voters to not vote for John, not vote for George W. Bush, to vote for Kerry. So we had to marshal in people from Texas to help protect that. The legislature addressed the problem. We made sure that there was 100 feet that you couldn't approach voters. We tightened the laws there.
Early they had that rule where you can't stand within
within 100 feet. So then we also made sure
that wasn't a thing back then.
I'm sorry?
Like that rule of 100 feet wasn't there back then?
It was not as enforced as it is now.
Okay.
The other issue was we had different hours for early voting in all different counties, and we were seeing way different standards. So we tightened the law to make sure that early voting can only be within those 2 weeks, within a 12-hour period, that they can't be extended till 9 or anything like that. After I left the legislature briefly curtailed early voting to 9 days, which I thought was a giant mistake. And
so shortening from 2 weeks to just like a week and a half.
Yes, and there was thoughts that Republicans had done it because early voting was something for Democrats. And one of the
I disagree. I think early voting is for anybody.
This is the issue. And one of my big disagreements with the early voting law is where we have early voting. Early voting right now is only allowed in libraries, city halls, or government-owned buildings.
And schools, maybe?
Yes, but they don't.
Because FIU recently, like last...
Yes, they don't do early voting in schools because of the fact that, for the most part, a school cannot use... They can't give away a hall for 2 weeks. We have election day at schools, and the schools do a teacher work day because the schools can accommodate 1 day, but we don't really have early voting in schools.
I understand.
If we allowed, early voting to be held in vacant commercial space, vacant shopping mall space.
Would that be a conflict of interest?
No, it would not. The government rents the area out, holds early voting there, and
with
in
their own staff, their own resources.
Banquet halls. All those areas can accommodate you, rent it out for 2 weeks. The problem is it's expensive.
It is.
But as a society, we still spend. Even if everybody talks about campaign finance. Even if you look at all the money that the government spends on election and all the private money, all the campaign contributions that come in, all that money as a country is still less than what the country spends on Halloween. So it is.
So it's such a minuscule pool of actual funds.
We still spend less on elections than we do on Halloween. Forget about Christmas.
Oh my
so the truth is that money, as a conservative, as a Republican, I don't believe that money can fix every problem. But elections are one of those problems that money can fix. I do think if
Because
we
of the
spent
people
more-
who can be voted into office.
So
the
I
ideas.
think we should have some more types of early voting places.
Understood.
So suburban Republicans can go and early vote, and it can be easier for them. I think that would be a great idea. I think that more
There's a lot of
money,
topics that
better
you
trained
touched upon
people.
that I've been writing, so I don't mean to seem rude, but man, I've never thought about it like that. And so, for example, as somebody who's gone to early voting as, like the campaigner, what I've seen is that there's a lot of ways that there could be voter suppression. But does that happen nowadays? I'm trying to say like I've only been doing it since like
still,
2016.
in Little Haiti,
so.
we have an issue that concerned us on. There are Haitian Americans who still have a hard time reading and writing even in Creole, and they get voter assistance. And anybody who has a hard time should be allowed voter assistance. But one of the things
Or
we
is somebody
found,
taking you?
you take someone in, they
But what if
sign a
it's
form.
okay, hold up. Now, what if it's the same campaign? Like, what if it's like
That's the issue.
and all they're firefighters?
We saw one guy. The voter assistance law bars anybody, your employer and a union person, from being the voter assistant.
Well, I'll tell you, I witnessed firsthand that occurring. Okay, to a voting site, but we could talk about that elsewhere. But could you keep explaining that?
So basically, what we found is one guy goes in with a voter, takes him in to vote, and then leaves and comes back with another voter and takes them in to
literally
vote.
like cycling it, like running a game on
and
it.
that's something that I think we need to look at. Voter assistance is protected by the Voting Rights Act at the federal level, so it is very hard to do a change to something that's federally protected without the Justice Department doing an investigation. I still think we need to look at voter assistance and make sure it is not abused. We have to have a system where anybody who requires the assistance can get it. But
should that be by like a third party? Should that be like allocated government resource?
I think,
or
I
can
think
it be
we can,
like, you know what I mean?
I think we should stop people from assisting more than 10 people. So, if
I swear you're saying like it's like a numbers.
exactly,
'Cause I'm
nobody
telling
should
you,
assist more than 10 people.
There was a group of firefighters that were taking voters from Joe Carollo's campaign into the voting precinct. I firsthand, because I don't know if you know where Flagler and 14th is. Due to the construction, it was like almost impossible to park or even voters to get there, right? But that was a early voting site. And then obviously on voting day, I was like, out of the many
I
sites.
remember, and they were buzzing. A campaign is allowed to bus people in.
That's what I'm trying to understand. Like,
Okay.
what's the
a campaign is allowed to bus people in. There's a difference between doing the grassroots and calling people up. Hey, can I do transportation? For Leanna Ross Layton's first election in '89, I picked up people and drove
Exactly.
them.
That's
to
a
the
very good
polls.
tactic, not
You're
to say-
allowed
yeah,
to
yeah.
do that. Another thing is to go in with them to the voting booth
And then
say,
be like,
vote
circle this.
and this.
Ah,
Exactly.
understood.
That's the fear. That's the issue that we have to make
And
sure.
they can go in because somebody's like, oh, I can't write, so I need somebody to fill it in
Now,
for me.
mind you, we still see that. I am sure that my big fear is vote theft in nursing homes. I did a
Or
case.
like ALS, like assisted living facilities.
I did a case where I did an investigation of fraud in a North Miami-based district. My client was a Haitian American, John Patrick Julian, may he rest in peace. He passed away a year after, but the election was stolen from him because his opponent got a campaign consultant that would put her mother in 3 different nursing homes, and the woman would go in and steal the votes from the old people. Go in, here, please
But
sign here.
actually, like going in and filling,
yeah,
like,
she'd
fill
fill out
it,
the
fill that,
ballots,
fill
have
that,
them
fill that.
sign it. One of the things that we have to spend, and this is a good way to stop fraud, but it's expensive, we have to have mandatory supervised mail voting in nursing homes. Anybody who does...
So any mail that comes from this type of facility...
Any person who requests a ballot by mail, who lives in an ALF, a nursing home, or residential housing,
Right.
the elections, they can request right now
Just handpick
supervised
them out.
voting. So if, let's say you run a nursing home, you have 200 registered voters in your nursing home.
supervised.
You are allowed to call the supervisor of elections and say, we have 200 people here who have requested absentee ballots. Rather than mailing them to us, come with the ballots, set up the privacy booths, and have them vote on
and
a
let them do
special
it.
day.
And if they need assistance, you can help them out.
And right now, the elections department provides that assistance as requested by the place. We should make this mandatory.
Like across
any
the board.
nursing home, any ALF, any type of residential housing should have mandatory supervised vote by mail. So if your residents are voting and they can't leave that building because they have physical
I've been
issues.
to those senior centers. You can get away with a lot of things
Exactly.
with the
So
group of the abuelitas.
have that
So
be supervised by the elections department. That should be something that the state spends money on. That is a guaranteed fraud prevention. Listen, we have fraud in vote by mail voting, but 90% of the fraud is in these centers. It is in senior centers, retirement homes.
and they carry a lot of weight, especially just for the volume of people.
Fraud. There's virtually no fraud in door-to-door
Right,
absentee mail because nobody. The fraud is all money-based. Somebody gets hired. We see the majority of the fraud that we see is actually in nonpartisan races and in the party primaries. We rarely see that much vote by
Like in
mail
the
fraud
runoffs or like
in
like
the general
decisive
election
races, yeah.
because they're that aware. Most of these people are aware enough that they're not going to let someone take their vote for president or governor in a partisan race. In a primary where the candidates are very much similar, or in a nonpartisan race where they don't care, they sell the people sell their vote. The biggest problem we have with voter fraud is compliance by the voter. They're complicit in letting someone steal their vote.
Yeah, but most people don't even know what voter laws are. Most people don't even know what the real laws are. So.
Most voter fraud is done because the voter let themselves be defrauded, yes.